In this video, we're going to talk about a type of file called RMarkdown that we'll be using to write all of our code. RMarkdown files are a type of file where we can not only write code, but we can also write regular text. You can see an example of such a file on the right. This might look a little bit overwhelming at this point, but don't worry, it will all make sense very soon. The other advantage of our Markdown files is we can convert them into other file types. If you have an existing R Markdown file, then you can navigate to the Files tab in the bottom right corner of RStudio and open it from there. Any R Markdown file will end with the file extension .rmd. If for some reason you need to create an entirely new R Markdown file in RStudio, you can go up to the File menu at the very top of RStudio, and in the drop-down, click New File, and then R Markdown. As I mentioned, one of the advantages of R Markdown files is we can convert them into other file types. This is called knitting the R Markdown file. We can create PDFs. We can also create web pages, Word documents, lecture slides like these ones, or books like the course textbook. To knit an R Markdown file to another type of file, you would click the Knit button at the top of the File Editor tab in RStudio. So right above the pane in the top left where you're editing your file, there'll be a button that looks like a little ball of wool with a knitting needle through it, and that will knit the R Markdown file to another type of file, such as a PDF. When you knit the file, all of the code in the document is rerun, even if you've previously run it before. That means that if you have stored the output of code previously, that won't be available to the file when it's being knit. All of the code is rerun from scratch. The code and the results of the code then are interspersed with the text of the document that's not code, and the result is converted into the output file. So when we type text into an R Markdown file, it's not going to look very pretty. It won't be formatted. It will just look like typing text into a file in a very basic editor like Notepad in Windows. To get nice formatting, we need to insert what are called formatting symbols. So you can see an example here. On the left is what we might type into our Markdown file. And on the right is what it would look like when we have knitted to an output. So the default would be just text that looks like a regular paragraph of text, but then symbols that we put around words convert it into different types of formatting. So if you put 2 asterisks before and after a word, like we've done with the word bold here, then the output will become bolded text. Similarly, a single asterisk before and after some text will italicize it, or backtick symbols will convert it into text that looks like code. The other thing we need to add into our R Markdown files are what are called code chunks. And this is sections of the file where we have code instead of text. We need to explicitly indicate where code starts and ends so that RStudio knows where it is when it's knitting the file. Otherwise, it won't be able to distinguish between what is text that should not be run as code and what is code that should be run as code. So the way we indicate the start and end of a code chunk are with these 3 symbols called backticks followed by curly brackets with an R in the middle. You can see an example here. Now, these are not single quotation marks or apostrophes. Okay, these are backtick symbols, which on a US keyboard you'll find in the top left of the keyboard. We can't use single quotation marks in its place. That won't work. The curly brackets R indicates that the code in this chunk is code written in the R programming language. Technically, it's possible to write code in code chunks in other languages, so we need to explicitly indicate that, no, this is R code. Then we have whatever code we want. We can have as many lines as we want. Here we just have one line where we're saying 2 plus 2. And then we end the code chunk with a line of just 3 backtick symbols, nothing else. Then when you knit the RMarkdown file to another output, the contents of the code chunk will be displayed. So we'll be able to see the code that we wrote. And below that, we'll get the output of the code that was generated from running the code chunk. So here we see that 2 plus 2 equals 4. And that is inserted into our document. So if we have more complicated code, as we'll see in the future, where, for example, we might create a graph using code, we'd see the code to create the graph, and the graph itself would be displayed below the code chunk in our output.